Welcome back to eCoreAcademy, future doctors and nurses, if you're watching this video. My name is Anita and I am one of the teachers and co-founders here, along with my younger brother, AJ. We're going to be going away from the normally scheduled program. I usually do Algebra 2, but today I wanted to bring you all a new anatomy and physiology video because I realized that our anatomy and physiology videos are very well received by those of you who are interested in anatomy and medicine. As you know, in anatomy and physiology, I take over the cardiovascular system because that's the system of the body that I studied. So I'm going to be doing the cardiovascular system. The next lesson that I've prepared for us after the previous one is this one, and it's all about the heart wall. I've talked about the heart wall, like I remember going over the pericardium and then going over the 4 layers of the heart in a previous video, but this video is going to be all about the heart wall. I'm going to be talking about the 3 main layers of the heart wall. And while we go through this video, I just want you to constantly ask yourself, what are the 3 main layers of the heart? What are their functions and purposes? What is their importance? What would the heart be like if we didn't have them? So would we be able to have a heart that functioned properly without this layer, or would the heart be detrimentally affected if we didn't have this layer? So think about those key questions. Before I get into the video and teaching you all, I would really appreciate it if you paused and liked the video to show your support for AJ and myself as teachers here on eCoreAcademy. Also subscribe to the channel so you can join our expanding student community. You don't want to miss out on that. You should definitely join the community. Also, hit the post notification bell so you're notified of our latest posts. Don't feel afraid to drop a comment down below. We love to hear what you think. And lastly, please share using our socials in the description box below with friends and family who could benefit from our lessons and who you think would like to join the student community as well. Okay, so let's get right into the video. Okay, let's look at an overview of the 3 main layers. The reason I'm saying 3 layers instead of 4 layers is because oftentimes we include the pericardium and the epicardium together as one layer because parts of the pericardium are pretty much fused with parts of the epicardium, so that's why I just titled both of them as epicardium. That shouldn't confuse you. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. So here's an overview of the 3 layers so you know exactly what the 3 layers that we're going to be focusing on are. The outermost layer, which is the epicardium, so pretty much an overview of its function and purpose. It prevents the heart from expanding or moving too much. Remember, the heart is a hollow muscular organ. It's constantly pumping in rhythmic contractions to get blood throughout your heart to your lungs to get oxygen and then out of your aorta and through your body. In order to do this, the heart has to pump quite a bit. And if you've seen like digital replays of this, if you've seen animations of this, you know how aggressively your heart beats. Your epicardium is pretty much what attaches it to surrounding surfaces in your viscera, like other viscera and other structures in your chest cavity, to make sure your heart isn't just pumping all over the place. So it keeps it like tethered almost, so the aggressive beating of your heart doesn't shift it or move it too much. So it prevents your heart from expanding too much when it gets filled up with blood or moving too much when it's beating. That is the purpose of the epicardium. Again, it's the outer layer of the heart. The myocardium is the second layer, and it's the middle layer of the heart. It is the thickest layer of the heart. It has specialized cells which initiate contractions that drive your heartbeat. So the myocardium contains the bulk of the heart muscle, and this heart muscle has its own electric conducting system. So it contains specialized cells that send electrical signals to one another and throughout your heart muscle. So your heart muscle knows when to squeeze and contract and then release and expand and relax. So that is the purpose of the myocardium. It does all that kind of heavy lifting. It does the contractions and it controls the contractions and relaxation of your heart muscle. Lastly, we have the endocardium, which is the innermost layer. It lines the insides of your cavities, which are your chambers. Remember, your chambers of the heart, you have 4 main chambers: right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle. So the endocardium is the layer that lines the very inside surface of those chambers, and it also makes up your valves. So it lines the inside of your valves. Remember, your valves are your tricuspid valve, your pulmonary valve, your mitral or bicuspid valve, and your aortic valve. So those are the 3 layers of the heart. That's just an overview. Let's go to the next slide. Now we have a diagram of the 3 layers of the heart that I just mentioned. So let's take a look at this diagram before we get into the specific functionalities of each layer of the heart. So here is your actual heart. What they've done in this diagram is they've made it look like someone has cut out a square chunk of the heart wall and pulled it out so you can actually examine it. So here is that chunk that they've pulled out, right? This like cube right here. This is the outermost layer. This is the epicardium. As you can see, it looks yellow. It's actually some fatty tissue. So it's the outer protective layer. Its purpose is to protect the heart. Even though it's nestled in your chest, it's supposed to protect the heart from other viscera and surrounding structures. Also keeps your heart tethered, make sure it doesn't expand too much, and it doesn't move around too much when it's aggressively pumping blood. Then we have the myocardium, which is this chunk right here, this like pinkish chunk of muscle. It is the muscular middle layer of the heart. These right here are like your cell nuclei. So the heart muscle is made of cells, and these cells have a lot of nuclei and mitochondria, because remember, your heart literally doesn't stop beating. So it needs a lot of energy, needs a lot of muscle, lot of specialized muscle that can pass those electrical signals to one another through gap junctions. That is your myocardium. All of that is contained in your myocardium. Lastly, we have this, it's in green, but it really isn't green. This is your endocardium. Remember, it's your thin inner layer. It is made of epithelial tissue, which we'll be talking about later. And this tissue is just one cell. It's just one cell thick, and it just lines the innermost layers of your heart, as in your those hollow spaces, your cavities / chambers of your heart, along with your heart valves. So that's a diagram of the 3 layers of the heart. Let's get into the next slide. Here we're going to be talking about each layer of the heart. First will be the epicardium, then the myocardium, then the endocardium, and then we'll finish it off by going over the fibrous skeleton of the heart. So let's begin with the epicardium. The epicardium is a membranous outer surface of the heart. It is a thin membranous sac. What does this mean? Well, the outermost layer of the heart is the pericardium. Remember how we were talking about the pericardial sac? The heart pretty much just sits in this pericardial sac. The epicardium is part of this pericardial sac. So it's the membranous outer surface of the heart. It's made of membrane. It's on the outermost surface it's on the outer part of the heart. And it's a sac because it reflects on itself, meaning it creates that pericardial sac. Like I just said, the heart sits in this pericardial sac. It does everything in this pericardial sac. It pumps, it relaxes, it does everything. The pericardial sac is really meant to protect the heart muscles and the inner layers of the heart. It's also the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. So what does this mean? So visceral layer of serous pericardium. So the visceral layer is pretty much the innermost surface. So if I had a chunk of muscle, if I was looking at it like this outside part would be the parietal layer. This topmost part that's exposed to the outside would be the parietal layer. The innermost layer we call the visceral layer. So the epicardium is the inside of the pericardium. It is the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Like I said, as opposed to so let me try to make more sense of this. If this was the pericardium and this was the heart muscle, so your myocardium, the inside of the heart, this was the outside of your heart, like your chest cavity. Your epicardium is located right here. It is in the visceral layer, the innermost layer of the pericardium. This space between my hands is your pericardial cavity. That's where your fluid is. That's where that's like that space between the inside and the outside. This part out here, which is exposed to the rest of your chest cavity, is your parietal pericardium. So remember, innermost layer is the epicardium. It's the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. And if you don't remember, the pericardium is the outermost part of the heart, and it consists of a fibrous layer and a serous membrane. The epicardium would be closer to the serous membrane. Remember, fibrous means dense connective tissue, and it protects the heart. If you see here for epicardium, I've written it protects inner layers of the heart. The whole purpose of the pericardium and epicardium as these sacs are to protect the inner layers of the heart and the heart muscle. So that's pretty much what the fibrous layer of the pericardium does. It is made of dense, which is very closely compactive connective tissue that protects the heart. And meanwhile, serous And serous just means it's serous part of the heart would be a part of the heart that produces fluid. So if I was saying serous and I refer to any part of the body, it's like this serous organ, this serous. Serous means a part of the body producing fluid. Think of the word serum. Serum sounds a lot like serous. Well, because they both are connected to each other. Serum, if you're watching a film or a sci-fi movie or something like that, serum would be like what maybe like a doctor would inject into someone, like that liquid inside the needle, like a serum. So that's what serous means. What do I want to go over next? So what does the serous part of the pericardium do? Well, like I just said, it produces fluid. It's lined by fluid that reduces friction during the beating of the heart. So it produces pericardial fluid, like I've written on the screen, reduces friction between heart membranes. So when your heart is pumping, this pericardial fluid pretty much lubricates your heart muscles. It makes sure that they don't go rough. Think of a car. A car needs to be well oiled so that it can run smoothly. Similarly, we have pericardial fluid and we have heart muscle. So that's like the same relation between the two of them. On the screen, I've also written viscera at the bottom. I've gone over this before, but it's the internal organs of the body's main cavities. So like one of your main cavities is your chest cavity. Viscera would include your heart, your lungs, your trachea, your esophagus, and other internal organs that are part of your chest cavity. So that's what viscera means. If you hear me saying viscera, that is what I mean. I also want to go over what the epicardium consists of, so what it's made up of. It's made of this fatty tissue, like I showed you on the last slide, that yellow tissue. It's made of fatty tissue called adipose tissue, so remember that. It's the outermost layer of the epicardium, which is in contact with the pericardial cavity, is made of fatty adipose tissue. Then the next layer consists of connective tissue, with like that dense connective tissue, and it includes collagen and just like regular connective tissue, tight and loose connective tissue, etc. It's lined on the side that it's lined on the side that comes into contact with the myocardium, so like the innermost side, with by squamous type epithelium called the mesothelium. So let me break that down for you. It's lined on the outside by inside, so closest to the myocardium, by squamous type epithelium called the mesothelium. Well, we already went over what the epithelium is. Epithelium is that one cell thick layer that lines the insides of your organs or insides of layers of the heart. So it's the innermost layer, one cell thick layer. Squamous pretty much means it just epithelium, but it's also like it's a specialized type of epithelium. So it's a flattened cell. It's like a flattened version of the epithelium. If this was a cell that belonged as part of the epithelium, squamous pretty much means that you just flatten that cell out even more. And squamous means a layer of epithelium that consists of thin, flattened cells. So this kind of epithelium that's part of the epicardium that lines the barrier between the epicardium and the myocardium is called the mesothelium. And the mesothelium is a layer of cells that you can find not only in your heart, but you can also find it in your lungs, parts of your abdomen, and in testes for males. So that's all I have on the epicardium. If you didn't get that down, please replay it. Also listen, because I talked about most of the notes that you might want to take. So please replay that, listen to my voice, also copy down what's on the screen, but just make sure you understand what the epicardium is. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're going to be talking about the myocardium now. So I just want to bring to your attention one thing. On the last slide, we were looking at the epicardium. Here you can see like the coronary arteries and the coronary veins. What does this mean? Well, if I draw right here, you can see this long blue vein. That is your great cardiac vein, and then you see this red also over here. Those are your coronary. The red would be your coronary artery, and then your blue would be your coronary vein. So those are just veins and arteries that supply blood to the heart. And as you can see in the epicardium, you can actually see these things because these things are mainly part of your epicardium. Some of these are part of the myocardium, but if I go to the next slide, the myocardium is mainly made of heart of heart muscle. So the heart muscle obviously needs blood as well. So there, like I said, there are arteries and veins part of this layer, but it's mostly made up of a bulk of heart muscle. If you look at this muscle, you see it's like striped. We call this striated. It's a lot like skeletal muscle in that way, but the difference is that heart muscle, it's striated, but it also branches off. So think of a tree. That's what heart muscle looks a lot like. So long, striated, which is striped, and it branches off. It's connected. If this was heart muscle, if this one heart muscle cell, it'd be connected at both ends and maybe even multiple other ends to other heart muscle. So that is the unique thing about the striped shape this striping you might see as part of the myocardium. That's just a characteristic of heart muscle. So let's get into what the myocardium actually is. It is the cardiac muscle layer forming the bulk of the heart. So it's the middle layer, and it's very thick because of all this cardiac muscle. It's the bulk of the heart. So let me put it in this way. Think of like a weightlifting champion, like a really bulky man or woman who's a weightlifting champion. It's almost like that. This is like the weightlifting. This is like the powerhouse of the heart. This is where all the muscle is contained that does that hard work. So like I said, it is full of cardiac muscle. This is where the work of the heart is done. This is the working part of the heart wall, and it does all the contracting and the pumping of blood. The myocardium has the muscle which contracts and expands, like I just said, to push blood throughout the heart and body. So this heart muscle, as part of the myocardium, it uses electrostimulation, which again is part of the conducting system of the heart that we'll be going over later. It uses this to contract and expand. So contract as in your chambers of your heart are squeezing, expand as in chambers of your heart are relaxing, and this rhythmic contraction helps to push blood throughout your heart and body. So without your cardiac muscle, there's really no way for your heart to be able to move so that it can pump blood throughout itself in your body. So what is the myocardium made of? It's made of some connective tissue because it's mainly made of heart muscle cells, but also needs connective tissue to provide that structure so that your heart, because if you think about it this way, your skeleton pretty much your bones pretty much provide support for your muscle. Therefore, your connective tissue pretty much provides support for your heart muscle. It also has some blood vessels, like I said, including some coronary veins and arteries, because your heart muscle needs a lot of blood supplied to it so that it can get rid of waste and it can just get enough nutrients so that you have enough so that it can produce enough energy and electrical stimulations to keep your heart constantly pumping. It's lined on the top or outside. So if this was the myocardium, if this was the inside part, so if this was the inside part leading to your endocardium and your heart chambers, and this was the outside part where the epicardium and pericardium are, this outermost part is lined on the top or outside by the endocardium. So the endocardium touches the mesothelial layer of the endocardium touches the myocardium. And I want to mention this. It controls the cardiac cycle and heartbeat, which is at the bottom of this slide. And this is done through specialized cells in the cardiac conduction system. So the myocardium has three main functions, and let me list them for you. The first one is that it provides structure and support for the heart chambers and heart muscle. So like I said with the analogy with your skeleton and your bones, well, your muscles need your bones so that the bones provide structure for the muscles. So that is pretty much what the myocardium is. It provides a kind of structure for the heart chambers, and so that your heart muscle can wrap around it. Also, it helps in contraction and relaxation of the heart walls, so blood can pass through the chambers. So your myocardium has the muscle that regulates this when your heart contracts and when your heart relaxes, and this in turn controls the cardiac cycle and heartbeat. So whichever way your myocardial muscle moves, that is how your heartbeat is controlled. So that's also known as the cardiac cycle. So that is what the myocardium does. And like I said, this is done through specialized cells in the cardiac conduction system. That is known as electrostimulation. Again, we're going to be going over that in an entirely different lesson because that is quite a complicated process. But there are specialized cells. There are pacemaker cells, which I mentioned before, that start electrical impulses in places like your sinoatrial node. And these electrical impulses are carried by your heart muscle throughout your heart, and you have different nodes along the way. You have more electrical stimulation along the way. You have electrical stimulation that stimulates your atria to contract. Then you have electrical stimulation that stimulates your ventricles to contract. So this is all of these cells and all of these nodes and electrical pathways are found in your myocardium, and your myocardium is that it is the layer of the heart wall that listens to these electrical signals and regulates them. So that is all for the myocardium. The third and innermost layer of the heart is the endocardium. Before I even get into the information, let's look at this diagram so you have a perspective of where the endocardium is. This outermost layer, like this kind of maroon that you see, this is, like it says here, the epicardium, your outermost layer, part of your pericardium. This layer right here, it's not labeled on this diagram, but I'll do it for you. This pinkish looking layer, this, as you can probably tell, is your I'm just going to hyphenate it, cardium. And then that innermost layer is that is highlighted here. This is your endocardium. So it's a very thin layer. Oh, sorry. So your myocardium extends to encompass all of this as well. You see these these lines that are running through this reddish area. That is part of the conducting system of the heart. So your myocardium does include that. This tiny little space right here is your endocardium. As you can see, this right here is your left ventricle, and this right here is your right ventricle. It's pretty much just lining the inside. So that is the very last layer that you will see before you reach that hollow cavity, that hollow space that are your ventricles and your atria, but you can't see it in this diagram. So that's where the endocardium, that's where the endocardium is. The endocardium, like I said, is the innermost layer of the heart. As you can see on this diagram, the epicardium is all the way out here. Then the myocardium is this bulk in the middle, and then this very thin space that's lining your cavities is your endocardium. It is the endothelial layer of the inner myocardial surface. So what does that mean? Well, endothelial, like I said, is that one cell thick layer of tissue, and it's the inner myocardial surface. So what it means is if this was the myocardium, and this right here was where the epicardium was, so the outside of your heart, this is where the endocardium would be. So it's on the inside surface, so the inside part of your myocardium. That's what the surface is. So if I was thinking about my arm, this is the surface. This is the outermost part of my arm. However, this is opposite. So this is the innermost part, but it's of the myocardium. So it, like I said, lines inner surfaces of the heart, which is that's the endocardium, and it contains endothelial tissue. You'll see endothelial tissue throughout your layers, but this is where most of the endothelial tissue will be. What else is important? Well, it's a smooth membrane that lines the inside of the heart chambers, as you can see with the left and right ventricle in this diagram, and it forms the surfaces of the heart valves. So if you think of your heart valves, endothelial tissues line those heart valves. That's pretty much what it's saying. And your heart valves that it lines include your tricuspid valve, your pulmonary valve, your mitral/bicuspid valve, and your aortic valve. So it lines the insides of your heart chambers and also lines the insides of your heart valves. What is next? So it also lines your interventricular septum. So what in the world is your interventricular septum? Well, let's break it down. So inter means inside, and ventricular means inter can mean inside or like between, and ventricular are your ventricles. So do you see this space right here? I'm going to draw in black, but this space right here, that is your interventricular septum. You see how it's that layer of cells right between your ventricles that actually separates your ventricles? Well, lining this interventricular septum is your endocardium and your epithelial cells. You also see it lining your interatrial septum. You can't see the interatrial septum here, but there's also a wall between the atria that separate them. It also lines that wall. And it's also the inside layer. So the innermost layer of your endocardium, so the layer that is like right next to that hollow space, so that the layer that is farthest inward is called your squamous endothelium. So it is a layer of endothelium of flattened one cell thick. It's a flattened one cell thick layer. And then this squamous endothelium sits on top of another layer called subendothelial tissue. And what it is, subendothelial tissue is just another layer of supportive thin tissue underneath your squamous endothelium. And then your subendothelial tissue sits on top of a third layer, which is called your subendocardial layer, and it's just another supportive thin layer, and the purpose of it is to separate the endothelial surface, so the outermost endothelial layer from the heart muscle. So it protects that delicate endocardium from your myocardium. That is the purpose of your subendocardial layer. So those are the main layers of your endocardium itself. And like a review I've written on the screen, the surface, when you see surface, you're going to see it quite a lot in anatomy. It pretty much means the exterior, upper boundary, outermost part. So if it says outer surface, then it would mean the outer part. If I was thinking about the endocardium, if I was saying the outermost surface of the endocardium, well, that would be the part of the endocardium that is touching the myocardium. If I said the innermost surface of the endocardium, that is your squamous endothelial tissue that opens up into your heart chamber. And lastly, if you don't remember, endothelial tissue, super important. It's a single thinnest layer of cells that wraps organs. So if you looked inside any organ that's hollow, you would see the last layer of cells that opens up into that large hollow space are your endothelial cells. So that's all for the endocardium. Let's go to the next slide. And I just want to go over this. This is the fibrous skeleton of the heart. So the heart has a very strong fibrous skeleton that's often overlooked. If you think about it, like I was saying, with your actual skeleton, your muscles wrap around it and your skeleton gives it structure and support. That is pretty much the fibrous skeleton of the heart, made of dense connective tissue. Obviously, your heart doesn't have bones in it because it's an organ, but think of this fibrous skeleton kind of like that. If you think of a bug, bugs and insects have exoskeletons. They're not made of bone. They're made of this protein called chitin. Similarly, your heart doesn't have bones in it, but it has this fibrous skeleton made of dense connective tissue that kind of provides structure for your heart muscle. So very dense connective tissue and a lot of collagen. Remember, dense means closely compacted. So this if you see right here, this tissue is very closely compacted, and it looks a lot like bone if it wasn't pinkish. So that's what dense connective tissue is. It's the insertion point for all cardiac muscle. So what does this mean? Your cardiac muscle pretty much just wraps around this fibrous skeleton and uses the fibrous skeleton for support and structure. So it's the insertion point for cardiac muscle. Your fibrous skeleton is made of crisscrossing, interlacing layers of connective tissue. As I said, if you look at this diagram right here, you can see the grooves and you can see the lines and how they kind of move with one another. They're interlacing. High density structures, like I said, very closely compacted. You find a lot of the fibrous skeleton in the myocardium because you have all of that muscle in the myocardium and they need structure. So you find, like I said, a lot of fibrous skeleton in the myocardium. So that shouldn't say forms, but it's forms and connects valves. So if you think of a valve, they need a lot of structure. So look up here at these valves. Blood is passing through them. So they can't be weak they can't be weak muscle. They need to have a lot of structure. So if you ever eat chicken, right, and you see those pieces of cartilage and things like that, and you might, when you're eating it, you might be like, oh, this tastes like bone. Well, even though it's not bone, valves are a lot like that, if that makes sense. They need to be pretty rigorous and tough because they need to have like a definite shape for when blood passes through them. So your fibrous skeleton is going to form and connect your valves. Your fibrous skeleton also makes up your interatrial and interventricular septum that we discussed on the last slide. And it influences forces exerted to propel blood through them. That's with your valves. So your fibrous skeleton helps to make up your valves, and it influences how your valves open and close and how blood is forced through them and how blood travels throughout your heart and throughout your body. The important thing about the fibrous skeleton regarding the valves is that it helps allow a delay between the filling of the ventricles and the contracting of the atria. So what happens is when blood enters your atria and your atria is trying to push that blood into your ventricles, there has to be a bit of a delay so that your ventricles can actually fill up with blood before they push that blood through a different valve. So that's what the fibrous skeleton does. It kind of hinders the electrostimulation of the myocardium. It pauses it for a second so your ventricles can fill up and then contract. So the fibrous skeleton kind of regulates electrostimulation in that way as well. So that was the fibrous skeleton. That's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed that video. I thought it was really fun. I love talking about the cardiovascular system for anatomy and physiology, and I hope that was helpful for all of you future medical practitioners and doctors and nurses and etc. So please like and subscribe to our channel. Also hit the post notification bell and don't feel afraid to drop a comment down below. Please share using our socials in the description box below, including Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We have a website coming up soon that I keep reminding you all about. I'll post it all over social media when it comes out so you won't miss the memo. It's going to have a bunch of notes exclusive from AJ and myself because we've taken these courses, so we're going to give you access to those notes following lessons, along with a quiz so you can self-evaluate on your understanding of a topic. Lastly, if you have any personal or business correspondences, please email us at eCoreAcademy@gmail.com if you'd rather not put them in the comments section. Okay, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you next time. Bye.